Why bother with history? An introduction to the study of the history of psychology, part 2 of 3. Psychology 182, History and Systems of Psychology, Professor Michael Botwin, Department of Psychology, California State University, Fresno. Hi, in this unit we're going to discuss scientific development. We'll talk about two theorists, Thomas Kuhn and Karl Popper. They set the stage for how science is done that still applies to this very day. In fact, you might remember some of their ideas from your research methods or stats courses. So let's talk about these guys who did some important work. Karl Popper is a philosopher of science, and in his work he developed a series of stages of scientific development. And his 3 stages were the definition of a problem, developing theories about that, and then ultimately criticisms about the theory. Let's look at each one of these stages in turn. First of all, Popper says we have to define a problem. What is the appropriate problem? What are we trying to figure out? In my research, we look at mate preferences. And one of the areas that's commonly studied, although not in our lab, is sexual jealousy. So my mentor, David Buss, and his colleagues defined sexual jealousy as an important human emotion that has many evolutionary benefits. After that problem was defined, there was a theory that was developed about sexual jealousy. And in that theory, Buss stated that men are more jealous about a sexual breach in the relationship, and women are more jealous of an emotional breach in the relationship. That goes back to basic evolutionary reasons. Men would be potentially raising children that weren't their own if their partner had sex outside of the relationship. Women would in turn lose the resources of the male in terms of raising the children if he defected and formed a new bond with a new partner and put his resources into that second family. So, Buss developed a theory about sexual jealousy based on these sex differences. You can see why theory development is important. Now, the last phase of Popper's theory is criticism. And what's going on with criticism? Well, criticism is criticism of the current theory. People start seeing holes in the theory. They start trying to redefine it. And by criticizing a theory, you can change that theory. You can build new knowledge, which will progress science. So, although the basic ideas in Buss's theory of sexual jealousy still are pertinent and still hold up to scientific analysis, another set of researchers came along and said, hey, men are upset by an emotional defection of their partner, and women are not really happy if their partner has sex with another person. They in turn developed something called the double shot hypothesis that put both of those things together. Now, those are still relatively new ideas, and people are still debating over the two notions of the sex-differentiated theory or the double shot hypothesis. But it's interesting to look at an example of how a theory moves through different stages. Popper also developed the idea of falsifiability. And he says that falsifiability is the most important difference between a scientific theory and a non-scientific theory. That's why you spend so much time in Psych 144, the research methods class, learning about research design. We have to be able to falsify a theory. We have to say that our observations will not always be supported. If everything is true about a theory, it's not science. Popper also said that based on the idea of falsifiability, you need to be able to take risky predictions. You need to make predictions that may not be supported by the data. And in fact, that's the only way that science progresses, is if people take chances and don't always make safe predictions, but make risky ones that may not work, in the hope that they might extend our knowledge. And this happens all the time. A lot of times new ideas that are out there are rejected by the journals because they're kind of outside of the current way of scientific thinking. That's happened in many occasions in science. So we must be able to always go out on a limb and be willing to do science that just may not work. One of my mentors from afar, I think he's one of the smartest living guys in psychology, Robert Sternberg, says that in his writings on doing science and doing psychology, states that if you never have a paper rejected, you're not really doing good science because you're playing it too safe and you're not doing anything risky. Yep, sorry. Our other more modern theorist at the chapter 1 of Hergenhahn, or Hergenhahn and Henley, or whatever copy that you're using, sorry for the beep there, is Thomas Kuhn. Now, Thomas Kuhn developed a progression of scientific ideas. And basically, this is called a paradigm. Kuhn says that basically there's a common set of assumptions held by most members of a field. And this is kind of how you do your research. The paradigm determines what's the appropriate research and how you should do it. Now, the only problem with paradigms is scientists, being human mostly, tend to get emotionally invested in their paradigm. And scientists should be objective. I recount one story from my hero of personality psychology, one of them, Dr. Hans Eysenck, who presented some data that did not support psychodynamic therapy, did support cognitive behavioral therapy. A psychoanalyst in the crowd was so incensed with Eysenck's findings that he ran up on stage and wanted to fight Eysenck over the data. Well, that fight didn't happen and cooler heads prevailed, but it's easy to see how you can get emotionally invested in the paradigm because it's the basis and foundation of the work that you're doing. There are 3 phases to Kuhn's theory of scientific development. The first stage, it's kind of a mouthful, the pre-paradigmic stage, has 3 steps. It's a pre-science phase. Competing theories are developed. People are just kind of random gathering of facts. People don't know what direction the research is going, and even if there's going to be a paradigm developing from it. But basically this is similar to Popper's ideas of theory development. And there's a lot of fact gathering. There's a lot of thinking about theories that can be built. Kuhn's second stage of scientific development is normal science. During normal science, one theoretical view overcomes the rivals and becomes the dominant paradigm. And it's what most scientists work in. They develop their hypotheses out of the dominant paradigm and then do what Kuhn calls normal science. And once enough work has been done, it just gets to a point of mopping up unresolved issues, answering questions that weren't able to be empirically addressed before, things like that. Finally, we reach Kuhn's revolutionary stage. This is similar to Popper's criticism. Anomalies start appearing in the current paradigm. People start seeing holes in the theory. Alternate views are developed that challenge the paradigm, move it to a new way of thinking. And eventually, the new paradigm replaces the old one. We've seen this happen many, many times in science. We're going to see this happen many, many times during our class. Basic physics was replaced by Einstein and his theories, which replaced Newtonian theory. Now, there were still many components of Newtonian theory that worked well, but not all of them. And one has to look at these changes. So this is the basic stages of scientific theory and the ideas of scientific development that were presented in your textbook. So let's, in the next unit, look at different forms of ways of looking at humans' place in the universe. This has been a We Have Couches video production. Copyright 2020, Professor Michael Botwin. All rights reserved. Pippin needs a haircut. Bye now.